The typhoon had torn through like an angry giant. It ripped roofs from buildings, threw fishing boats onto the streets, and changed the coastline in ways that would take years to fix. But for 17-year-old, the storm had done something else. It had opened a door that should have stayed closed forever. Was not special. He knew this better than anyone. His grades were average. He had no talent for sports. He was thin and quiet, the kind of boy that teachers forgot existed until they called attendance. He lived with his grandmother, Park, in a small house near the sea. His parents had died 10 years ago in what everyone called an accident, though no one could ever explain what kind of accident leaves no bodies and no evidence. His only real friend was a girl with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. She wanted to study the stars. She spent her nights looking through a cheap telescope and her days telling that he needed to find something to care about. On the evening after the typhoon, found something. He was walking along the cliffs where the sea caves were. The storm had collapsed part of the rock face, revealing a cave that no map had ever shown. Should have gone home. The rocks were unstable. The sun was setting, but something pulled him forward, a feeling in his chest like a hook behind his ribs. The cave was dark and cold. Water dripped from the ceiling. Used his phone's flashlight to see, stepping carefully over broken stones. The cave went deeper than it should have. The walls were too smooth, too regular. This was not natural. At the end of the cave, he found it. A sword. It was buried in the rock like someone had thrust it there 1,000 years ago and walked away. The blade was black, so black that it seemed to eat the light from his phone. The hilt was wrapped in something that looked like leather but felt like silk when he touched it. Strange symbols covered the metal, patterns that hurt his eyes if he looked at them too long. Reached out, he did not know why. His hand moved on its own. The moment his fingers touched the hilt, the symbols exploded with pale blue fire. The light filled the cave. It filled his eyes. It filled his mind. And then came the voice. It did not speak Korean. It did not speak any language had ever heard. But he understood it perfectly, the way you understand a dream. After 10,000 cycles, a worthy vessel awakens me. Pain shot through his palm. He tried to let go but could not. The sword was burning a mark into his skin, a symbol that matched the ones on the blade. Then, as quickly as it began, it stopped. The fire died. The cave went dark. Stood there breathing hard, the sword now in his hand. It weighed nothing. It felt like holding a piece of his own body. He ran home. His grandmother was waiting for him. She was a small woman with white hair and kind eyes, but those eyes went wide when she saw what he carried. Her face turned pale. Her hands began to shake. "Where did you find that?" she whispered. Before could answer, the sky changed. It started as a sound, a deep hum that made the windows rattle and the dogs in the neighborhood howl. Then the clouds split apart and 3 shapes descended. They were ships, but not like any ship had seen in movies or games. They were black and angular, covered in sharp edges that made them look like weapons themselves. On their hulls, a symbol glowed red, a circle with 3 claw marks through it. The ships landed in the streets. Hatches opened. Soldiers poured out. They were not human. They stood 7 feet tall, covered in dark armor that moved with their bodies like a second skin. Their helmets had no visors, just smooth surfaces that reflected the streetlights. They carried weapons that hummed with energy. They moved in perfect formation, spreading through the neighborhood like a disease. One of them pointed its house. It said, its voice was mechanical, translated through speakers. The signal came from here. Find the bearer, kill anyone who resists. His grandmother grabbed his arm. The back door now. They ran. Was outside already, having come to check on them after the storm. Her face was white with fear, but she did not freeze. She never froze. What is happening? What are those things? I do not know, said, but they want this sword. They made it to the rooftop of a nearby building, climbing the fire escape while the alien soldiers broke down the door to his grandmother's house. From above, could see the damage they caused. They tore through walls like paper. They threw furniture aside like toys. They were looking for him. Then one of them looked up. There, it said, pointing, the bearer. 6 soldiers climbed after them. They moved fast, faster than anything that big should move, pushed his grandmother and behind him. He raised the sword, not knowing what else to do. You are untrained, the voice in his head said. It was the sword speaking to him again. But I will guide you, trust your body, let me move through you. The first soldier reached the roof. It swung a blade of crackling energy at its head. Moved. He did not think, he did not plan. His body simply acted. He ducked under the swing, stepped inside the soldier's guard, and drove the black sword through its chest. The armor that had seemed so strong parted like cloth. The soldier fell. The other 5 attacked together. Became something else. He was still himself, still scared, still confused. But his body knew things it should not know. He spun between attacks. He cut through weapons. He moved so fast that the soldiers could not track him. In 30 seconds, all 6 lay dead at his feet. He stood there, breathing hard, covered in something that was not quite blood. The sword hummed in his hand, satisfied. "What am I?" he whispered. "You are my bearer," the sword answered. "The first worthy one in 10,000 cycles, but you are unforged, weak. If you do not learn, you will die within the cycle." More soldiers were coming. Could hear them in the streets below, shouting in their strange language, organizing a search. The ships were deploying more troops. This was not a raid. This was an invasion. His grandmother touched his shoulder. Her fear had faded, replaced by something harder, something old. "I knew this day would come," she said quietly. "I hoped it would not, but the sword chose you just as it chose your father." Turned to her. "My father, what do you mean? What do you know?" But there was no time for answers. The soldiers had found them again. A dozen this time, rising on platforms that floated in the air, weapons aimed and ready. Stepped forward, placing himself between the aliens and the 2 people he loved most. The sword felt warm in his hand. The symbols on his palm glowed softly. He was still just a boy. He had no training. He had no army. He had nothing but a weapon he did not understand and a fire in his heart that refused to go out. But as he stood there facing an enemy from beyond the stars, made a choice. He would not run. He would not hide. He would fight. And somewhere in the dark spaces between galaxies, ancient powers took notice. The had awakened. The game had changed. The war for Earth had begun. The battle on the rooftop lasted only minutes, but it changed everything. Fought like a demon. The sword guided his hands, showing him where to cut, when to dodge, how to move between enemies like water through stones. By the end, 12 alien soldiers lay broken on the concrete and stood among them, shaking with exhaustion he had never felt before. But victory meant nothing. More ships were coming. The sky was full of them now, black shapes against the stars, all bearing that red symbol of claw marks. The entire city had become a war zone. "We have to run," said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. "They will keep coming. We cannot fight them all." She was right, knew she was right, but where could they go? The aliens had ships that could cross the sky in seconds. They had weapons that could level buildings. They had numbers beyond counting. What chance did 3 people have against all of that? His grandmother answered that question. "I know a place, follow me." She led them through back alleys and underground passages that never knew existed. His grandmother moved with purpose, like she had walked this path before, like she had been preparing for this moment her whole life. They traveled through the night, avoiding patrols, hiding in shadows, until they reached an old warehouse at the edge of the city. Inside, everything changed. The warehouse looked abandoned from outside. Inside, it was a bunker, concrete walls 3 feet thick, emergency supplies stacked to the ceiling, communication equipment that looked more advanced than anything had seen, and on the walls, photographs. Dozens of photographs showing strange lights in the sky, unusual rock formations, symbols carved into ancient stones, symbols that matched the ones on his sword. "What is this place?" asked. His grandmother sat down heavily on a metal chair. She suddenly looked very old, very tired. "Your grandfather built it, and his father before him. Our family has been watching for this day for 5 generations. We always knew they would come. We just did not know when." She told him everything. Aliens were called the. They ruled something called the Dominion, an empire that stretched across 800 worlds. They had been watching Earth for centuries, searching for something, searching for the sword. They called it. A weapon from an age before they existed, forged by beings called the architects who had seeded life across the galaxy and then vanished. There was their greatest creation, a blade that could cut through reality itself. It chose its own bearers, and it had not chosen anyone for 10,000 years. Until now. "Your father found it first," his grandmother said. Her eyes grew wet. 20 years ago in that same cave, the sword called to him just as it called to you, but he was not ready. They found him before he could learn to use its power. They killed him. They killed your mother too, trying to get the sword, but they had already hidden itself again, waiting for the next worthy bearer. Felt like the ground had opened beneath his feet. His parents had not died in an accident. They had been murdered by the same creatures now hunting him. "Why did you never tell me?" he asked. "Because I hoped the sword would never wake again. I hoped you could live a normal life." She wiped her eyes. "I was a fool." For 3 days they hid in the bunker while the world went mad outside. They did not care about hiding anymore. They attacked cities openly, demanding that humans surrender the bearer. Governments panicked. Militaries mobilized but could do nothing against alien technology. Watched the news on old screens, seeing his home burn, seeing people die, knowing it was all because of him. On the 4th day, someone found them. Her name was. She was Korean Special Forces, part of a unit sent to capture and hand him over to the in exchange for peace. But she had seen what the aliens did to the villages they searched. She had seen them kill children looking for information. She had decided that any peace bought with a teenager's life was not worth having. "I am not here to take you," she said, standing in the bunker doorway with her rifle pointed at the ground. "I am here to help, if you will let me." Was hard. She did not smile, she did not comfort, but she knew how to survive, she knew tactics, she knew discipline. Over the next weeks, hiding in different safe houses across the country, she trained in everything she could. How to move without being seen. How to fight without the sword when he needed to. How to plan, how to think, how to stay alive when everything wanted him dead. The sword helped too. It spoke to him more now, teaching him its secrets. It could cut through any material. It could open small rifts in space, though doing so exhausted him completely. And it contained memories, thousands of years of memories from every bearer who came before. If concentrated, he could see through their eyes, feel their experiences, learn from their battles. But the strain was immense. Too much too fast, and his mind would break. Worked on the technology they captured from fallen soldiers. She was brilliant in ways that surprised even her. Within weeks, she had figured out how their communication systems worked. She built devices that could detect patrols from miles away. She gave them an edge, however small. But they were not finished. They sent something worse than soldiers. They sent a hunter. His name was the Unbroken. He stood 8 feet tall, encased in armor that had never been pierced. He had personally killed the champions of 40 different species across the galaxy. He was the Dominion's finest weapon, and he had come for one purpose, to claim thee and Mount's head on his wall. They met in the ruins of a small town that they had already destroyed, had come to rescue survivors, had been waiting for him. The fight was nothing like the battles with ordinary soldiers, was faster than anything that large should be. His blows cracked the earth. His armor turned aside this edge, something had thought impossible. For every cut landed 3. Within minutes was bleeding from a dozen wounds, barely standing, watching his death walk toward him with slow, confident steps. "You are weak," said his voice like grinding stone. "The sword chose poorly. I will enjoy taking it from your corpse." He raised his massive blade for the killing blow. And something inside broke open. The screamed in his mind, showing him something it had never shown before. A door, a path, a way out. Without thinking, reached for it. Power flooded through him, more than he could control. Space itself tore apart in front of him, a wound in reality that howled with impossible colors. He grabbed his grandmother. He grabbed, and he threw them all through the rift, throwing himself after them, leaving roaring with fury in a ruined town on a wounded Earth. The rift closed behind them. When opened his eyes, he saw stars he did not recognize. A space station hung before them, massive and ancient, covered in lights from 1,000 different sources. Ships of every shape and size floated around it like fish around a reef. He had taken them halfway across the galaxy. Behind them, Earth burned. Ahead of them, the unknown waited. And somewhere in the darkness, the Unbroken swore an oath of vengeance that would echo across the stars. The station was called Threshold. It floated at the edge of known space, in a region so far from the Dominion's reach that even their warships rarely came here. It was a place for outcasts, criminals, refugees, people who had nowhere else to go. For and his small group of survivors, it was the only safe harbor in a hostile universe. They arrived unconscious, drifting in the vacuum until a salvage ship picked them up. Woke 3 days later in a medical bay that smelled of chemicals he could not name. His wounds had been treated. His body ached in places he did not know could ache. But he was alive. A man stood by his bed. He was human, which surprised more than anything else about this strange place. He had gray hair, tired eyes, and the look of someone who had seen too much and forgotten how to care. "So you are the one causing all the trouble," the man said. His Korean was rusty but understandable. "The whole galaxy is talking about you. A human with the... I thought it was a joke until I saw that sword." His name was Ren. 30 years ago he had been a pilot in the Korean Air Force. Then they had taken him, just another specimen from a primitive world, useful for labor and nothing else. He had escaped, eventually. Built a life out here in the darkness between stars. Forgot what Earth looked like. Forgot what hope felt like. "Your friends are safe," said. "The old woman and the young one, the soldier too. They are asking about you every hour. Annoying, really." He almost smiled. "It has been a long time since I heard Korean spoken by anyone but myself." Threshold was vast. Millions of beings lived there from hundreds of different species. Some had fled the Dominion. Some had been driven from there by war or disaster. Some were simply looking for profit in the chaos at the galaxy's edge. They all shared one thing. The Dominion wanted them dead or enslaved, and they had refused to accept either fate. When was strong enough to walk, he explored the station with by his side. She was fascinated by everything. The technology here was centuries beyond Earth's. Ships that could cross light years in hours. Weapons that could crack moons. Medical machines that could regrow lost limbs. And yet the people who used these wonders were not so different from humans. They loved. They feared. They hoped. They suffered. "We are not as far behind as we thought," said one night, watching ships come and go through a massive viewport. "Our minds work the same way. We just started later. Give us time and we could build all of this." "If we survive," said. That was the question, was it not? Earth was still under Dominion occupation. They had declared humanity a conquered species. Anyone who resisted was killed. Anyone who cooperated was enslaved. And the supreme tyrant himself, the Eternal, had taken personal interest in the hunt for the bearer. Learned about from the refugees. He was not just an emperor. He was something older, something that had lived for 3,000 years through methods no one understood. He had built the Dominion from nothing, conquering world after world, crushing every resistance that rose against him. He feared nothing. Except the sword had killed beings like him before. It was the only weapon in the galaxy that could threaten his immortality. That was why he hunted it so desperately. That was why he would never stop. A group called the Remnant found on Threshold. They were the last organized resistance against the Dominion, scattered cells across 100 worlds, fighting a war they knew they could not win. They had heard about the human with the ancient blade. They wanted him to become their symbol. Refused. "I am just a teenager," he told their leader, a woman from a species he could not pronounce. "I do not know how to lead armies. I barely know how to use this sword. Find someone else." "There is no one else," she said simply. "The chose you. That means something to people. It gives them hope. Without hope we have nothing." He still refused. He was scared. He was tired. He wanted to go home, even though he knew home did not exist anymore. Then the Dominion found Threshold. They came with a fleet of 50 ships, demanding the station surrender the bearer. When the station's council hesitated, they opened fire on the civilian sectors. They killed 30,000 people in 10 minutes. Men, women, children, species from across the galaxy, burned to ash because they happened to be in the wrong place. Because was there. He watched the destruction from the viewport, gripping his arm, his grandmother weeping silently beside him. He saw families die. He saw hope die. He saw what the Dominion did to anyone who stood in their way. And something changed inside him. "Tell the Remnant I accept," he said quietly. "Tell them I will be their symbol. Tell them I will fight." The training began that same day. Threw himself into learning. They opened its memories to him, showing him battles from 1,000 years ago, techniques from warriors of species long extinct. He practiced until his hands bled and then practiced more, pushed his physical limits, taught him to pilot ships and think like a smuggler, built him equipment, adapting Dominion technology into tools the Resistance could use. His grandmother revealed her final secret. She had known about the extraterrestrial threat for decades. She had been part of a hidden organization on Earth, watchers who monitored alien activity and prepared for the day when contact would finally come. She had files, data, intelligence gathered over generations. She gave it all to the Remnant. Months passed, changed. The scared boy who had found a sword in a cave became something harder, sharper, more dangerous. He learned to access the memories of previous bearers without losing himself. He learned to open rifts in space without passing out. He learned to fight in ways that made even the Remnant's best soldiers step back in fear. But he never forgot why he was fighting. Every night before he slept, he looked at a photograph he had saved from Earth. His parents, young and smiling, standing in front of their house inn. They had died fighting the Dominion. He would not let their sacrifice be meaningless. The day came when was ready for his first real mission. The Remnant had located a prison world where the Dominion kept slaves from 100 conquered species. 50,000 beings worked to death in mines and factories, their hope long dead. Led the strike team himself, 20 fighters against a garrison of 500. Impossible odds, but he had something the Dominion had forgotten existed, the burning human refusal to accept defeat. They won. They freed the prisoners. They destroyed the garrison, and before they left, recorded a message, broadcast it across every channel, breaking through Dominion encryption, sending it to every world in the galaxy. His face appeared on 1,000,000,000 screens. A young human, barely 18 years old, holding a sword of black fire. "My name is," he said, "I am human. I come from a small world you tried to conquer. I hold the blade that your tyrant fears, and I am coming for your empire. Every world you have enslaved I will free. Every crime you have committed I will answer. Run if you want. Hide if you can, but know this, humanity does not kneel, and neither do I." The message ended. The galaxy held its breath. And in his throne room at the heart of the Dominion, the Eternal watched the recording with eyes that had seen civilizations rise and fall. For the first time in 1,000 years, he felt something he barely recognized. He felt worried. The galaxy burned with rebellion. Its message had spread like fire through dry grass. On 100 worlds, slaves who had forgotten how to hope suddenly remembered. They rose against their masters. They sabotaged factories. They refused to work. They fought back with whatever weapons they could find, shouting the name of the human boy who had dared to challenge the eternal tyrant. The remnant grew. Ships that had hidden for decades came out of the darkness. Warriors who had given up took up arms again. Species that had been enemies for centuries united against a common foe. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Dominion was afraid. The Eternal responded with fury. He issued a decree that echoed across every world he controlled. The human species would be made an example. Earth would burn. Every man, woman, and child on that small blue planet would die screaming, and their deaths would remind the galaxy what happened to those who the Dominion. A fleet of 200 warships set course for Earth. Learned of this from intercepted communications. He gathered his closest allies in a cramped room on a rebel carrier, who had become the rebellion's chief technologist, who commanded their ground forces, who led their ragtag fleet, and his grandmother, who had become an unexpected symbol herself, the old human woman who had raised the galaxy's most wanted man. "We cannot stop 200 ships," said bluntly. "We have 30 vessels at most. Half of them are held together with hope and welding. If we fight that fleet directly, we die." "Then we do not fight directly," said. "We get there first, we warn Earth, we help them prepare, and then we make the Dominion pay for every meter they try to take." Laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to defend a planet that has never seen alien technology against the largest fleet the Dominion has sent anywhere in a century. That is not courage. That is suicide. "Maybe," said, "but Earth is my home, those are my people, I will not abandon them." They went. The journey to Earth took 2 weeks. Spent every hour preparing, planning, hopping. Designed weapons that could be built with Earth's technology but powered by alien principles. Developed tactics for ground defense. Plotted approach vectors and escape routes and 100 contingency plans that all ended in death. When they arrived, Earth was already in chaos. The Dominion occupation forces had been broadcasting the tyrant's decree. Humanity knew what was coming. Some had given up, waiting for death. Others had risen in desperate rebellion against the soldiers on their world. Governments had crumbled. Cities had become. In the midst of this chaos, small fleet arrived like a miracle from the stars. He broadcast another message, this one just for Earth. "This is, I know you are afraid. I know the enemy seems unstoppable, but I have seen things out there in the galaxy that give me hope. I have seen slaves break their chains. I have seen small forces defeat great ones through courage and cleverness. I have seen that the Dominion can bleed. They can lose. And today we are going to prove it. Fight with me. Fight for Earth. Fight because humanity does not surrender. Not today. Not ever." The response was overwhelming. Military forces that had been scattered reunited. Civilians took up arms. Scientists worked around the clock to build the weapons had designed. In 2 weeks, Earth transformed from a conquered world into a fortress. The Dominion fleet arrived on a morning in late spring. 200 warships filled the sky, blocking out the sun. They were beautiful in a terrible way, black and angular, bristling with weapons that could crack continents. Against them stood 30 rebel vessels and whatever Earth had managed to build in 2 weeks. The battle began at dawn. Earth's forces struck first. Missiles launched from hidden silos. Ships darted out from behind the moon. Nuclear weapons that humanity had been afraid to use against each other now flew toward alien warships. The Dominion had expected easy slaughter. They found a hornet's nest instead. But it was not enough. It was never going to be enough. The Dominion's technology was too advanced. Their ships shrugged off attacks that should have destroyed them. Their weapons cut through Earth's defenses like paper. For every vessel that fell, 10 human ships died. Cities burned. Millions perished. The sky itself seemed to weep fire. Watched from his position on a carrier at the edge of the battle, he saw his dying. He saw everything he loved being destroyed. There is only one way, the said in his mind. The flagship, their commander is aboard, cut off the head and the body will falter. The flagship was a monster, 3 kilometers long, shielded by energy barriers that had never been breached, surrounded by 100 escort vessels. No one had ever boarded a Dominion flagship and lived. Did not hesitate. Get me close, he told. As close as you can, I will do the rest. His face was grim. You know this is probably the last thing I will ever do. Then make it count. They flew through hell. Was the greatest pilot had ever seen, dancing between weapons fire and debris, dodging attacks that should have been impossible to dodge. Escort ships fell on them. Destroyed 3, then 5, then lost count as his own ship began to fall apart around him. They reached the flagship's hull. Used the to cut through, tearing a hole in metal 10 feet thick. He leaped inside alone, leaving to escape if he could. The interior of the flagship was a nightmare. Soldiers everywhere, automated defenses, creatures that had been engineered for nothing but killing, fought through them all. He was not the scared boy who had first picked up the sword. He was something else now, a weapon himself, forged in pain and loss, burning with a fury that nothing could stop. He found waiting for him. The hunter had been given one more chance to redeem himself. He stood in the corridor leading to the command bridge, his massive blade in hand, his armor gleaming in the artificial light. I hoped you would come, said. I have dreamed of this moment, the moment I finally break you. They fought. The corridor became a storm of steel and fire. Was stronger than before, faster, his armor upgraded with technologies specifically designed to counter the. Every blow shook the walls. Every cut sprayed sparks across the floor. They were evenly matched, neither able to gain advantage, dancing on the edge of death. But had something did not. He had the memories of 100 warriors. He had the skills of beings who had fought battles that made this one look small, and he had something burning in his chest that refused to die. He found an opening, a tiny gap in his defense, a moment of overconfidence. The slid through, finding the weak point in that impenetrable armor, driving deep into the hunter's chest. Vel. Impossible, he whispered, purple blood pooling beneath him. I am unbroken, I am. You are finished, said he, the blade, and your empire will follow. He broadcast the kill across every Dominion channel. Every ship saw their greatest hunter fall to a human teenager. Morale crumbled. The fleet hesitated. Earth's defenders did not. In that moment of confusion, humanity struck back with everything it had left. Ships rammed into vessels. Soldiers on the ground launched suicidal attacks on occupation forces. The resistance fleet, battered and dying, made one final charge. The Dominion fleet retreated. They had come to destroy Earth. They left in shame, their flagship crippled, their hunter dead, their confidence shattered. It was not a complete victory. Millions had died. Cities were ruins. The planet would take generations to recover. But Earth survived. And in the galaxy beyond, enslaved worlds watched the impossible happen. They saw the Dominion run. They saw a human stand alone against the darkness and refuse to fall. The rebellion had just begun. 1 year had passed since the Battle of Earth. The galaxy had changed in ways that would have seemed impossible before. The rebellion had grown into a true coalition, an alliance of species united against the Dominion. 30 worlds had thrown off their chains. 100 more were in open revolt. The empire that had stood for 3,000 years was cracking at its foundations. And at the center of it all stood. He was 18 now, though he felt much older. The boy who had found a sword in a cave had become something else, a leader, a symbol, a weapon that the Dominion could not break. He had won battles that should have been unwinnable. He had freed slaves who had forgotten freedom existed. He had become the nightmare that kept commanders awake at night. But the war was not over. The supreme tyrant still sat on his throne, and he had decided to end the rebellion personally. The Eternal had 4 archons, beings nearly as old as himself, twisted and enhanced over, each one powerful enough to destroy worlds. They were his greatest weapons, reserved for threats that truly mattered. He sent them all to hunt the human boy. The archons came one by one. The first was called the Silencer. It had no physical form, just a presence that swallowed sound itself. Where it passed, nothing could speak, nothing could scream, nothing could hear the warnings that might save them. It found on a supply run in a remote sector, appearing without warning, attacking without mercy. Fighting something you cannot hear is almost impossible. Instincts were useless when he could not sense attacks coming. The Silencer nearly killed him 3 times in the first minute, but the whispered to him in ways that needed no sound, showing him how to feel vibrations in the air, how to read movements without hearing them. He learned to fight in perfect silence, trusting the bond with his blade alone. The battle lasted 3 hours. In the end, stood victorious over something that had not been defeated in 1,000 years. The second archon was called the Hollow. It consumed matter itself, absorbing anything it touched into a void where nothing returned. Physical attacks were useless. Energy weapons only made it stronger. Worked for weeks on the problem, studying everything they knew about the creature until she found the answer. The Hollow could consume matter, but it could not consume the heart of a star. Lured it to a dying sun, fighting defensively, giving ground deliberately, leading it closer and closer to the corona. When the Hollow realized the trap, it was too late. The star collapsed around it. Nothing escaped. The third archon was the Weeping Lord. It controlled minds, reaching into thoughts and rewriting them, turning allies against each other with a whisper. When it came for, it did not attack directly. It turned his own soldiers against him. Friends he had fought beside for months suddenly tried to kill him, their eyes empty, their will stolen. Refused to kill them. He refused to hurt people who had no choice in what they were doing. Instead, he ran, buying time while finished a neural dampener that could block the Weeping Lord's control. When the device activated, the Archon's power faltered, led a strike team that pinned it down while delivered the final blow. The fourth Archon was the final word. It was the oldest of them all, the first being had ever created, ancient beyond measure and powerful beyond reason. It did not have special abilities like the others. It simply could not be stopped. It was stronger than anything had faced. Faster, more durable. It learned from every attack, adapting instantly, becoming immune to whatever had hurt it before. They fought above a moon in a distant system. The battle was brutal beyond description. Mountains crumbled from the force of their exchanges. Craters formed where they struck the surface. Used every technique he knew, every memory from every bearer before him, and still he was losing. The final word was simply too powerful. Then came. The old pilot had survived the Battle of Earth, barely. His ship was held together with emergency repairs and stubborn refusal to die. He had been watching the fight from orbit, looking for any way to help, knowing there was nothing he could do against something like the final word. Until he saw his chance. The Archon had pinned, crushing him against a crater wall, preparing to deliver the killing blow. It was so focused on its target that it did not notice the small ship falling toward it, engines at full power, aimed directly at its back. Hit the final word at maximum velocity. The explosion lit up the sky. The Archon staggered, damaged for the first time in the entire fight, its concentration broken. Did not hesitate. He drove through its skull before it could recover. The final word fell. Ship was gone. There was no wreckage, no body, just an empty crater where a hero had given everything he had. Knelt in the dust, holding the sword that suddenly felt heavier than it ever had before. Had spent 30 years lost in the galaxy, cynical and bitter, believing that hope was for fools. He had died believing in something again. He had died so that could live. The debt could never be repaid, but it could be honored. When faced the supreme tyrant, the of the Dominion was a fortress wrapped in darkness. No one had ever breached its defenses. No rebellion had ever reached its gates, but did not come with a fleet. He came alone, using them to tear rifts through space, appearing in the heart of the palace before anyone could stop him. The Eternal waited for him. He was tall and thin, his body ancient but preserved, his eyes burning with intelligence that had accumulated over 3,000 years. He wore no armor. He carried no visible weapon. He simply sat on his throne, watching the human boy approach with something like curiosity. "You have come far," said. His voice was soft, almost gentle. "Farther than any who carried that blade before you. I have killed 3 of your predecessors personally, you know. They all had the same fire in their eyes. They all believed they could end me." "They failed," said. "Yes, they did," stood slowly. "The question is whether you have learned from their mistakes." The tyrant attacked without warning. He moved faster than light itself. One moment he was on his throne. The next he was everywhere at once, striking from angles that should not exist. Barely survived the first exchange, driven back by power that made the final word seem like a child. Was not just strong. He was beyond strength. He had accumulated abilities from 1,000 conquered species, stolen technologies from civilizations he had destroyed, lived long enough to master every form of combat that existed. Was outmatched. The fight spilled through the palace, destroying ancient halls and priceless treasures, bled from a dozen wounds. His bones cracked, his vision blurred, the screamed in his mind, feeding him everything it had, and still it was not enough. But then the sword did something it had never done before. The spirits of every previous bearer rose within him, not just their memories, not just their skills, them. 100 warriors from across 10,000 years, lending their strength to one final fight. Felt them all. The rage of warriors who had died fighting this same enemy, the love of parents who had sacrificed for their children, the hope of dreamers who had believed the galaxy could be better. He was not alone. He had never been alone. "This is what you do not understand," said, rising though his body screamed for him to stay down. "You have lived for 3,000 years and you are still alone. You have no friends, no family, no one who loves you, just slaves who fear you. That is why you will lose, because I fight for something, and you only fight for yourself." Laughed, sentiment, the last refuge of the dying. They clashed one final time. Accepted a mortal wound. His hand pierced his chest, reaching for his heart, but in accepting that wound, opened a gap in the tyrant's defense. The drove forward with all the power of 100 bearers, all the hope of 1,000,000,000,000 enslaved beings, all the fury of a boy from Earth who refused to give up. The blade struck true. The Eternal looked down at the sword in his chest. His immortality was shattering. The technologies that had kept him alive were failing. For the first time in 3,000 years, he felt death approaching. "Impossible," he whispered. "Nothing is impossible," said. "Humanity taught me that." The supreme tyrant died. The Dominion crumbled within weeks. Without, while holding it together, the empire dissolved into chaos. Slave worlds declared independence. Military commanders surrendered rather than face the coalition. 3,000 years of tyranny ended not with a bang, but with a sigh of relief from countless species finally set free. Survived. Barely. The coalition's doctors worked for months to repair the damage to his body. The went dormant, its purpose fulfilled, waiting for the next bearer who might not come for another 10,000 years. He returned to Earth, to a small house by the sea that had somehow survived everything. Found him there, standing on the beach where it had all begun. The scar on his palm had faded. He looked thin and tired and somehow more peaceful than she had ever seen him. "The coalition is asking for you," she said. "They want you to lead, to help rebuild, too." "I know," he said, "and I will, eventually." He turned to look at her, smiling for the first time in what felt like forever, But first, I think I want to finish high school. Laughed. After everything, after all the battles and losses and impossible victories, she laughed. You saved the galaxy, she said, and you want to take final exams. Someone told me once that I needed to find something to care about. He looked out at the ocean, at the sky that no longer held enemies. I think I found it, but I also want to remember what it feels like to be normal, even if it is just for a little while. The galaxy remembered. Songs were sung about him. Statues were built. His name became a legend that would last for, a story about a human boy who had stood against impossible darkness and refused to fall. But on a quiet beach inn, that boy was just a teenager looking at the stars, holding the hand of a girl who had been with him since the beginning, thinking about a future that was finally full of possibilities instead of threats. Humanity had proven itself worthy of the galaxy. And now, at last, they could begin to explore it in peace.